So with all of that out of the way, I am excited to welcome our three panelists to our panel. The first is Sabrina Walker-Hernandez, who is the president and CEO of Supporting World Hope. She has over 25 years of experience in the nonprofit management, fundraising, and leadership. One of Sabrina's greatest successes is that she's increased operation revenue from 750,000 to 2.5 million over an 8-year period, as well as being responsible for the planning and operations of a $12 million comprehensive capital campaign in the third poorest county in the United States. Sean Kozofsky is the nonprofit fixer. With over 28 years in local, state, and national nonprofits and political campaigns, Sean and his network of providers specialize in helping small organizations in every facet of running a nonprofit. His specialties are supporting executive directors, boards, and fundraising operations. And thirdly, we have Greg Nielsen, who is a vet and sought after speaker and consultant committing to helping leaders and organizations translate vision into reality. He's an accomplished nonprofit CEO, having previously led the Center for Nonprofit Excellence. His leadership was recognized locally and nationally and honored with awards from Better Business Bureau for Ethics and the Louisville Urban League for championing diversity. Just a big welcome to all three of these experts who have joined us here today. And so I wanted to start off with a bit of an icebreaker question for the three of you. You can introduce yourselves a bit more, add any more context, however you see fit. But what I would like to know is that all three of you are well-established, successful leaders and decision makers in this space. So what was your aha moment when it came to becoming confident in your decision-making skills? What clicked for you? And we can start off with Sean if we'd like.
Sure, Sean Kozofsky, nonprofit fixer is sort of my moniker in New York on Lenape land. So I think for me, I'm really focused on decision-making as a practice in nonprofits, groupthink, the ways that groups behave, like with teams, staff meetings, boards, errors in decision-making. And so one of the things I'm really interested in are the biases that creep in when we're making decision. Recency bias, making more decisions based on something you just heard. Availability bias, making decisions based on stuff that's right around you. There's hundreds of these biases in decision-making, and I'm sort of really fascinated at making sure that when we make decisions, we are as logical, not as psychological, as we are prone to be. Not that emotion is bad, but that more logical decision-making can be helpful when you're shepherding other people's funds and other people's staffs. So that's sort of like my decision-making aha.
I absolutely agree with that as well. Did any of our two other panelists want to jump in and speak next?
I'll say that for me, that I'll go back to what a mentor told me. And I'm a quick decision maker. I'm going to be very honest with you on that. But what I've learned over the course of time is, and I learned this from a mentor, is you make the best decision that you can with the information that is present to you. And you start out on a course. And if you find out that that course is not working, then you adjust. And that's the grace that you give yourself as you're moving through this, because we're not all knowing, but you do make the best decisions that you can with the information that you have.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that comes down to confidence as well, because if you're not confident in at least taking the risk, you're never going to be able to make the decision.
Sam, I would just add, for me, it was a consciousness of habits. You know, just having gone through different professional development experiences and working with coaches and mentors, just that awareness of habits. And habits can be good or habits can be bad. And just being able to look at a situation, look at your own leadership style and say, what are my habits? What are the habits that I want to keep and invest in and memorialize and make part of who I am and my leadership style? And what are the habits that may be holding me back? And it's the same analysis that I use with boards or with staffs when we're working to build the team, is understand, who are you as a leader? Who are you as a group or as a team? And what are the habits that are really exciting for you moving forward? And what are the habits that you might want to break in order to move forward?
Yeah, and I think it's definitely a muscle that we need to practice as well. So I would agree with that. Thankfully as well, we've got a lot of questions coming in from our audience. So I'm going to jump into the Q&A. So this one's from an anonymous. So I volunteer at a nonprofit now, but hoping to start mine in a couple of years. What are the most important skills or experience that a nonprofit leader needs to have so I can grow towards that?
I can jump in real quick. excuse me. I think we too often think that leadership comes from skills, like having to be a subject matter expert or having to specifically study management. Anyone who is humble and anyone who is a good listener or anyone who is open to feedback is going to be a responsive and flexible leader. So if you're going to lead your own nonprofit, be okay with ambiguity. You're not going to have all the answers all the time. Be okay with the mess. It's okay that I don't have all the answers today. The strategy will emerge. I have smart people around me with good intentions. The strategy will emerge. Don't feel like you need to overthink decisions. Just let the strategy sort of emerge. Use your instincts. Just use your judgment. If you've decided to start this organization and you know it's best for the people you're trying to serve and people you're trying to help, just trust that the information will make itself available to you. And don't try too hard to prepare. Read lots of books, all this different stuff on leadership and management. Just kind of lean in and just brace yourself. Yeah.
Sam, I'll jump in next. I've been with thousands of nonprofit leaders, and there are really two characteristics that always jump out to the forefront to me that I look for. The first is authenticity. I think anytime you're going to step into a leadership role, whether it's in the nonprofit sector or the for-profit side, having a sense of who you are and what your core values are really translates to your own leadership style. People follow people. And I think having that sense of authenticity is really important. The second is curiosity. The best leaders I've ever been around, whether it was in the military or in the nonprofit sector, have been the most curious individuals. They're the ones who are willing to ask questions. As Sean said, embrace the areas that you don't know as much about. And I always tell leaders, be willing to ask short questions and listen to long answers.
And I'll add to that, I think on my end, as far as I think that interpersonal skills is going to be needed. You have to be able to build relationships. Why do you have to be able to do that? One, because you have to work with your board of directors. And I always say, take care of your board and take care of the money. And both of those are built on relationships. So being able to work with people and inspire those around you, because again, it's people follow people. And so if you wanted something concrete to work on, it would be interpersonal skills.
I would agree with that. Our COO at Keela is developing a lot of us through leadership training materials, and I've learned so much just about communication styles and how important those are in being able to communicate with your team, because obviously not everybody communicates differently. And being a leader is understanding what people need at what time. And so I think it's more about people management and relationships, I think, than a lot of decision making that people always assume. So yeah, I would agree with everything that you said there. We had a question come in about boards, so I'm going to continue on this thread of thought. How important is it to have a good relationship with your board in order to get things over the line? Our board is more of a backseat type of board, and I never know what I can and can't approach them with. I'm afraid to ask leadership questions for fear of looking incompetent.
I'll take this one. You have to have a great relationship with your board of directors. It should not be a relationship that you're hesitant about, in my opinion. They are your partners. They are your force multipliers, and it should be based on trust and respect. And so one of the things that I think made a difference for me in my journey is that I had a board of 21, and at least once a year, I would meet with each of them for lunch outside of the board meeting, at least once a year. But for my board chair, I met with him or her monthly. And also I had a couple of board champions on the board that these are my go-to people when I needed to make a decision and didn't want to, perhaps take everything to every board, to the whole board, but I wanted their input before I approached the board. So you have to look at your board as a partner in this journey. And if you are not doing that, you're not going to advance the organization as much as you could, because you can't be everywhere all the time. And your board is your force multiplier. That's what I would say.
I'd also add just to what the questioner was saying about that fear of looking like, you may not be a confident leader, right? I think that the best nonprofit organizations and relationships between board and executive acknowledge what Sean said earlier, which is that this is messy, right? None of us have all of the answers. We are addressing issues and systemic challenges and problems that have existed in some cases for centuries. I admire and respect board members who come to a nonprofit staff and say, I don't have all the answers. Help me be the best board member I can be. Likewise, I respect nonprofit executive directors and CEOs and staff members who say, I'm really struggling here. I need your help with A, B, and C, and being as specific as possible. I don't think that shows weakness. I think that shows an embracing of the fact that these are really challenging issues, and nonprofit leadership is the master class, the advanced placement of leadership challenges.
And I would agree with everything Sabrina and Greg said. I would definitely lean into that part about feeling intimidated by asking questions. This goes to the imposter syndrome question. I run a climate change organization as my full-time sort of like role. And I was brought into this organization having zero experience in climate change. I was brought in for different reasons: fundraising, management background. I've run 5 different nonprofits in different causes. So my lack of knowledge of climate did not inhibit me. I knew that my team was made up of climate experts, right? We were going to balance each other out. If you don't know how to read financial statements, just ask the board. I would love some more training on how to read financial statements. So it's not stupid to ask questions about what does this column add up to, right? In fact, as leaders in nonprofits, we owe it to have the due diligence to ask these questions, right? So for every person that is afraid to ask a certain question, there's probably 4 other people hoping you're asking that question because they're like, I don't know how to do this either. So lean into it, be authentic, as Greg mentioned, just say, I don't know how to do this. I'm here because I have passion and I have time and I want to see results, but I don't know how to do X, Y, or Z. So I'm just going to ask some questions today, right? Just lean into that. It's actually a breath of fresh air.
And I think
Sam, one more. Oh,
yeah,
I'm sorry.
No.
One more point that it just reminds me of an experience that I had. One of the activities I used to do with every board chair. So whenever my board chair turned over as a nonprofit leader and I got a new board chair, during that kind of getting acclimated period, we would sit down and I would say, let's talk about the norms of our relationship moving forward. We're going to be partners here for the next year or 2 years, whatever the board chair term is. Let's set down a series of ground rules or a series of expectations so that I know what the rules of the road are and you know what to expect from me. So some of those are, we're not going to surprise each other in board meetings with brand new information, or we're going to communicate once a week, by email or have a standing meeting. I think sometimes sitting down with our board members and establishing those rules of the road together can be helpful in getting past some of that fear of, can I really ask this question or can I bring up this sensitive topic?
Because your board is a resource that should be tapped into. Like, we're
Yep.
bringing together a plethora of voices and experiences from all over different industries and sectors. I think it's sad when people in boards or when leaders in boards don't get along as well as they should, because we see that common question come up in a lot of our webinars, especially about boards. So maybe if there's any other strategies the 3 of you have for engaging with your board, this might be a good time to share them.
I think outside of, like I started off saying, is building relationships. You've got to build relationships with your board members. And not only building those relationships with your board members, it's also educating your board members on what their roles are, because we make the assumption that board members know how to be board members, and they don't. Oftentimes they come through the door, they come through the door as a clean slate. Or they come through the door as, this is how we did it at this other organization board that I served on. And so then you have to build those relationships with them, and you have to have those open lines of communication so that they can know what their roles and their expectations are. I think people respond, I will say a lot of people that I've worked with respond to knowing what is expected of them, especially people who are in the business field and oftentimes serve on boards. They don't have a lot of time. We have to remember that. They're busy professionals. And so the more you can clue in onto exactly what are your expectations of me, what am I responsible for, the better off I think you will be.
One thing I'll add also is that you need to get really clear on the division of labor and like the expectations, because the board is there to govern. Unless you have a working board with no staff, the board is there to govern and the staff are there to execute generally. And it is, as Sabrina mentioned, a partnership, right? So it's really clear to get understanding of like, what is this not? What is this role? What is this role not? For the chair, does the chair facilitate meetings or not? Do you rotate facilitation? Does the executive director take instruction from 12 different board members, or do they have just one boss on the board, right? Getting really clear about the division of labor. The more clarity you have and regular communications, on my website, I have a tool for the board chair and the executive director to have a standing biweekly agenda call. So they can meet in person or together, but it's a standing set of like 6 topics you're always talking about, so that there are no surprises, as people mentioned, right? So having open and clear communications, being completely honest and open about what's going on inside the organization, and having that good division of labor. These are all things that really matter. And then to the question that's in the chat, just really quickly, I think you absolutely need to have that open conversation. I always, as an executive director, I would always tell my board, what is going to be successful board service for you? Right? What do you need from me? Do you need resources, training on how to raise money? Do you need an orientation? Did you not get an orientation when you started? So like just definitely asking the board what they need from you. Doesn't mean you have to do it all, but ask them, what they would like, and then they should be asking you, how can we support you? Right? It's like a give and take, right? Just hammer out that relationship.
Just piggybacking off what Sabrina and Sean both just said, board members, I think, they're looking for 3 things, and they may not always voice it. They're looking for expectations. They want to know at a really specific level, what do you need from me? We need to get away as a sector from the broad, I want you to be a good board member, or I need an engaged, active board member, and be really specific. What does that look like on a day-to-day, month-to-month basis? So they need expectations. They need support. Training, continued coaching and mentoring. And then the third piece that's critically important is accountability. Board members are looking for a sense of accountability. How are they going to be held accountable for the expectations that they all agree to at the outset? And I think one of the transitions I love seeing nonprofit organizations make is taking that accountability piece off the shoulders of our already overburdened executive directors. The healthiest boards that I've been around are the ones that take ownership for their own team and their own team's expectations, performance, and accountability. So the sooner and the more effective a board can be at governing itself and holding itself and its members accountable, I think that frees up the executive director to focus on other areas of that partnership.
Awesome. And I actually think that you answered Venus's question in the Q&A, which is, how do you keep your boards focused on governance and not operational board members? So I'll leave that unless any of you had anything else that you wanted to add, and I can move on to some of the more of the questions that have come in.
Well, I will give some more clarity for that question too, because I think it will help some other people listening or watching the replay later. I would ask my board, if I'm just getting situated with my board, what do you want from me at board meetings? What do you want? A standing executive director report that covers the finances, the program updates, like a dashboard? Like, what is it that you want? And then over time, you get clear with the chair and the ED, what is an appropriate agenda for the board meeting, right? You don't want them diving into things like your personal salary during a board meeting, or what does so-and-so staff person doing on Fridays, it's really clear to keep your board focused on the governing things. Again, if your organization is more of a working board, that's okay, whatever your local culture is. In general, once you start having staff, though, you want to start getting the board toward, vision, passing a budget, and supervising the executive director, and basically governing, setting policy, and then holding the board to a high standard. After that, it's mostly execution for the staff. If the board does anything more than that, it is at the request of the staff.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sean. I have a question coming in directly for Sabrina. So it says, okay, so today is International Women's Day, and particularly this year, there's a talk about breaking the gender bias that exists in workplaces. As a woman who has navigated through different aspects of the nonprofit sector, what are some of the changes and improvements that you would like to see, and what would it take to get there?
Well, I guess some of the changes and improvement that I would like to see is, as you mentioned, like 73% of the sector is women, right? And so I think that the changes that I would like to see is, this is a soapbox issue for me. I would love to see increase in pay for nonprofit CEOs just across the board. I think that oftentimes the mentality that's brought to it is that we are solving world problems, is what I say. We're solving world problems. And as such, we should be compensated for that. I think because 73% of women, there is a salary gap that's not talked about in the nonprofit industry. And I think that because we bring such diverse skill sets, to run a nonprofit, you actually, you know a little bit about marketing, a little bit about building relationships, a little bit about, advocacy and working with politicians. You do it all. And we have such a diverse skill set, especially if you've been in it for 20 plus years and you've grown in it. So we have a great skill set, but we are not compensated for that. And it can go back to it can go back to how the nonprofit industry started in America. And I think a lot of that also is that 73% of nonprofits is run by women. So that's my soapbox issue. I always have a hard time with that, because I'm gonna go back into it again, because I think it's one of the most saddest things that oftentimes we advocate all our lives in our mission. And then when it comes time for retirement, we have to then rely on other nonprofits. We don't build a retirement for ourselves, and we haven't made any money throughout that journey. And I think that's quite unfair. So that would be my issue.
I actually have that stat for you as well. So women make up 56% of executive directors or CEOs at nonprofits that have annual budgets of less than 1 million, but make up only 22% of top positions at organizations with annual budgets of at least 50 million. And when they do make it to the top, they're often underpaid by 23%. And the statistic is obviously far lower for both women and men of color, which is an awesome segue into a question that I can ask the three of you. Not awesome because we're in UK. Essentially, we have more women leaders in small nonprofits than we have in larger organizations. And so those in larger organizations are paid less than their male counterparts. So what do you think is limiting the upward mobility of women in the nonprofit sector, and how can we change that?
Is that for any of us?
It's for any of you.
Repeat the question, please.
Yeah, please. I'm typing an answer for something and I want to make sure I get it.
Of course. So the question is, what do you think is limiting the upward mobility of women in the nonprofit sector, and how can we change that?
Men. Men are usually the problem. Let me just say this as a man, we're the worst. I'm a feminist. I used to run an abortion rights organization. So I'm just completely someone who's tuned into and I'm absolutely there on equity issues, on pay equity, committed my life around anti-racism work and like anti-sexism work. And I can tell you that like a lot of the structural things we see in nonprofits are men not wanting to share power, white people not wanting to share power. It has a lot to do with outdated impressions of who's qualified for a role, right? And so the most influential roles in boards and nonprofits still to this day tend to lean more toward men, men who have a certain attitude about what credentials or education or background qualifies you for leadership. And therefore, we tend to have women and women of color taking minutes in meetings. It's not uncommon in a nonprofit meeting for someone to ask a woman or woman of color to do the note taking, right? Notice when that's happening. That means they don't get to participate. There's 100 of these things happening all the time. So we have to call out these norms, but it's usually guys, usually not bad intentions, just uninformed, lazy, and unaware of the systems that they're reinforcing in the workplace that are holding women back.
Sam, I'd put an exclamation point on everything Sean just said, and also add to it that I don't know that we can understand that stat fully without also looking at similar data for boards, right? We talked about how women are disproportionately underrepresented in organizations over a budget size over $1 million. Let's look at board composition as well. Women are underrepresented in nonprofit boards over $1 million as well. women and men of color also underrepresented on nonprofit boards. So I think that we have to look at those two issues in conjunction with one another, because who's hiring the executive director? Who's in a position to promote from within? It's kind of a system that's perpetuating inequity in and of itself.
And there's a lot of unconscious biases around that as well, you know. Like Sean said, it's a lot of times it's not a bad intent. It's we have some unconscious biases. If you look at the statistics for nonprofits, what 84% are men, 84%, I think it was white men, and that's then there are a higher number of foundations run by white men, white people. So we just tend to surround ourselves with who we know and what we know, and oftentimes it's just unconscious bias. But as Sean said, it made me giggle because I did a board retreat recently, and it was the one female on the board who was taking the notes. And I thought, yeah, it's just an unconscious thing that we do, and we have to call people out on it. And one little tip that I've learned too, as I walk into any room, this is for my women out there, as I walk into any room, don't be afraid to take the chair at the top of the table. I often see women when they come to a boardroom or any meeting, they will not take that seat. And because that seat tends to indicate leadership, and they want to step back and they won't take that's the first seat I always took when I entered a room, because it's a mind thing. And so keep that in mind as well. Don't put yourself in a box.
I'm going to take that advice to heart for my in-person meeting for the first time in 2 years on Friday, and I'm going to take the top of the table.
That's right. Don't put yourself in a box.
Thank you. I'm going to jump back into some of the questions just because I'm conscious that things are speeding along real quick now. But okay, so this one is also from Anonymous. It seems like there has been a lot of causes, charities, and new and really good nonprofits spring up over the past couple of years. This is a great thing for the sector, but how can nonprofits differentiate themselves in today's climate?
I'm going to share in the chat in a minute a link to something that I believe could be really useful. First and foremost, I think you need to have a really solid mission statement. Too often nonprofits really flub sort of like the mission statement. So make it broad enough to make you interesting to lots of funders, but narrow enough to be meaningful, right? But the thing I'm going to share in the chat in a minute is called How to Create a Unique Value Proposition for Nonprofits. This is something that has been mastered by marketers and in the private sector, but we don't teach nonprofits often enough how to think about their own unique value proposition in the sector. So I'm going to send that in the chat in a second. Totally a free tool for folks to go download and just work through why is our organization's approach, skill set, talent, software, approach, data, geography, why are we uniquely situated to solve this particular problem? And don't be worried about too much duplication. There is enough need out there for duplication, right? What you don't want are two different nonprofits doing the exact thing that isn't helpful, right? Like completely duplicating services. There is enough need for two homeless organizations in one city, right? But you just don't want to be duplicating exact services, right? So figuring out your unique value proposition is really important, but you do want to reduce duplication of exact services if there's enough coverage, right?
Sam, I'll jump in. I love this question because I think too often we hear the kind of tried and true, there are too many nonprofits, or I wish that, they should just consolidate. I think what sets the nonprofit sector apart is the ability to collaborate and bring people and groups together to solve really challenging issues. So I think there's a stat out there that I think 75% of nonprofit organizations currently collaborate with another organization, either in their community or nationally. What we see around the world is that people are more divided than ever. If the value proposition of the sector as a whole and its individual organizations was the ability to bring disparate people and groups together to have civil discourse to solve challenging issues, that is about as valuable a value proposition as one could have. So if you want to talk about what could set the nonprofit sector apart from other sectors of the economy, that would be where I would want to start.
And is there power in partnerships between nonprofits that are similar within certain areas? I know advocacy is obviously quite a large focus, and I think there is power in numbers. So is there any advice you could give for nonprofits, maybe smaller nonprofits that are looking to make more of an impact and maybe haven't explored the area of advocacy or partnerships?
Definitely. I think that it's important though to remember that, collaboration is a spectrum of possibilities. Sometimes we jump all the way to the other end of the spectrum and we talk about merger. And mergers can be really powerful and make a big impact, but it's just part of a whole spectrum of options of collaboration. There's coalitions, there's sharing back office functions, there's advocacy partnerships and coalitions that form around that. So I encourage organizations to think about collaboration broadly and to think about where on that collaboration spectrum makes the most sense to enhance your impact.
I would piggyback on that too, as far as collaboration. You can collaborate around, joining together to hire a resource development person, joining together to hire a grant writer. It's not, I think a lot of times we go into the nonprofit sector and we think of competition, and it's not it should not be competitive. We should be leveraging our strengths. There is no, I would tell people locally here, we have all these organizations. Why are we going individually to get a copy machine? We should be collectively combining these back office functions so that we can get the best deal out there. And don't be afraid to collaborate with different industries. For example, with myself, with my organization, we collaborated with the local municipality. Why did we do that? We did that because we wanted our employees to have benefits. And so we collaborated with our city government and got benefits for our employees. You can collaborate with school districts. And the thing, you have to be creative when it comes to collaborations. And you have to, somebody out there has done it. That's what I always say. Somebody out there has done some type of collaboration, some type of partnership. Research, talk to people, ask people want to help. They will say, this is how we did it. This is how it can be done. And then you take those projects to the identified partners and say, okay, how can we emulate this? What would be the pros and cons of this? And move forward in that discussion. But don't be afraid to partner. It's not a competition. And oftentimes we see each other as competitors, competing for the same dollars, competing for the same resources. But funders want you to come together because they're more willing to support a larger collaborative than they are to support an individual organization.
Absolutely. I think that is such wise words of wisdom. I have a dream of creating like a WeWorking space for nonprofits. So how everyone's working remote, but everyone's kind of moving back to this hybrid environment. If we turned one WeWork into a hub in every city just for nonprofits to come in and work for the day, all different nonprofits, I feel like it would foster that collaboration so much easier. Anyways, that's a tangent.
Those actually exist. Like in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I used to organize, one business owner dedicated an entire building to nonprofits who were progressive working in that particular building. He wanted a brain trust of those groups. In Minneapolis, the former high school that Prince went to school in, a donor bought that high school and turned it into a nonprofit space for lots of local organizations to work in that old high school, right? There are local solutions to this work sharing, sort of like space sharing opportunity. So your dream is happening in some places.
Yes, that makes me very happy. I need to look into that a little bit more. Actually, Sean, this question is for you. So I'm going to quickly read it out. So as we all know, we're in the middle of what some will call a great reshuffle. We're seeing people move in and out of the nonprofit sector for several reasons, some of which have to do with remote work or competitive salaries, location. So what advice would you give nonprofit leaders who are looking for innovative ways to attract and retain talent in a time like this?
My nonprofit right now is about to move to a 4-day work week, right? Mind blown. So we're going to keep the same salaries, and we're not going to force people to work 4 10s. We're going to say everyone gets the same salary. Yes, we're recruiting. We're going to move. We just instituted a sabbatical policy for anyone who's there for 7 years or more. We actually pay people what they're worth. So salary actually matters in terms of retention. We have not had a turnover issue at all in my nonprofit, the Climate Advocacy Lab, which is my full-time position. We're about to move to a 4-day work week. We're going to pilot it for 3 months. Basically, you're asking your staff, if you want Fridays off, you have to get all your work done in 4 days, not 5. It doesn't sound like, it's not like a dream, right? It could be actually really stressful for certain people, including parents. So we're gonna try this. And I think that the 4-day work week gives people the opportunity to skip Friday if they can get all their work done. What it does is it makes people merciless about not going to meetings that don't matter, right? All my meetings are going to be by phone and they're 20 minutes now. All my standing meetings are going to be just cut down. I'm going to work through lunch, whatever, because people want Fridays off. Who is going to leave your workplace if they cannot recreate a 4-day work week somewhere else, right? It's just one of many ways to keep people interested. I think sharing the salary when you're posting jobs shows trust. I think instead of burying your non-discrimination statement at the bottom of your job posting, put it at the top. Talk actively about what you're doing inside your organization to be a learning organization. We do something at my organization, final thing, and then I'll be quiet. Called double loop learning, which is learning about how we learn. So we actively at the end of every staff meeting talk about, have we done or set anything in motion at this staff meeting that undermines our equity goals, our equity and justice goals, right? Have we started down the road of hiring someone, or have we started down the road of decision making that in any way undermines the things we have said we care about around racial justice, whatever, right? So double loop learning, or asking us to think about the way we're thinking, right? Challenging our gut assumptions is a way that our organization has flexed the muscle of critical thinking and also being really inclusive. And it means that people do not hesitate to say to me, the boss, the executive director, hey, this doesn't sound right. This doesn't seem congruent with what we said before. Just keeping a really flat and open, non-defensive sort of posture sets a great tone for the team.
Absolutely. And also you've won me over. Don't tell Keela, I would definitely come work with you. I'll open that question up to any of our other panelists in case they wanted to add anything in. Otherwise, I can jump into my questions.
Sam, I echo everything Sean said, and also would add, don't be afraid to talk to our staffs about what they value from a benefit standpoint. I think sometimes we make the mistake of kind of locking ourselves in a room as a board or as a senior leadership team and guessing at what would be valuable to our staff members, whether it's a shortened work week or, enhanced benefits in some way. It's an opportunity to involve our team, as Sean said, to keep it flat, to keep it conversational, to keep it collegial, and say, what are some of the benefits that you would value? Is it sabbatical? Is it additional professional development? And let's tailor how we want to attract and recruit and retain our staff members to what they need and what they truly value.
Absolutely. Well, Greg, I've got a question for you. One thing that we at Keela like about your work is that you're clearly a great communicator. I'm currently not. So you've had our CEO on our podcast, which some of our Keela team members listen to. And on your show, you do a great job of speaking to nonprofits in a way that resonates with them. So how can nonprofit leaders develop their communication skills so they can better engage and motivate their team?
So I would start with first the authenticity piece. You have to have your own individual leadership voice in order to connect with any community, any audience. So what is your leadership voice? And the more you understand that, the better. The second is to understand, where are those who you're trying to influence or you're trying to connect with, where are they located? I see a lot of nonprofit organizations with a communication strategy to just blast out to as many different platforms as possible. We're going to be on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and all of the other ones that I'm too old to understand. When in reality, it's understanding, where are your folks? So if you are trying to communicate with your donor base, or if you're trying to communicate with those who are likely to volunteer for your organization, what platform are they on? What messages are going to connect or resonate with them? Do they prefer video or do they prefer email? Do they prefer text messages, right? I've worked with organizations that have dramatically different results from the same communication structure because their audience prefers something. So the more you can tailor your approach to where the people you're trying to connect with are, I think the more successful you can be, and then use that authentic voice.
Absolutely. And did anyone else want to add anything? Perfect. Well, Sabrina, this kind of is a tail end into a question that I've got for you. So you've organized summits and spoken at a number of nonprofit events. You're big on relationship building, and you've also lead a vibrant community of nonprofit professionals on Facebook. So how important is it for nonprofit leaders to be a part of a community? And are there any such communities or groups that you can recommend?
I think it's critical for you to be a part of a community because being a nonprofit professional, especially a leader in a nonprofit, can be so isolating sometimes. Oftentimes we are in silos and we think that, you know, no one else is experiencing this problem and this is like in this alone, and you need to be able to talk to people. You need to be able to get with people who have experienced what you have experienced. Again, I am about, you know, talking to people and saying, okay, I have this problem. What have you done to solve this problem? We do not have to reinvent the wheel. I'm so anti reinventing the wheel. Sean has experienced this on my side. I do not reinvent wheels. It's a waste of time because somebody out there has already had this challenge to, or addressed this problem or the issue. So again, I think community is very important. And actually, that's why I think investing in professional development is really important. I love online. I love doing my online summit and I love my Facebook group, which is very popular, but there's still nothing like setting aside money for professional development and going to conferences and having that human interaction with people, because what you will find out is you will get the best learning. And sometimes it's not in the sessions. I'm going to say that. It's not in the sessions. It is meeting Sean or Gregory in the hallway or at the bar and having a conversation and saying, you know, this has happened, and them giving you advice. So having that community, having people that you can call on when you feel like that you're alone in this, whether that's a mentor, whether it's a co-CEO from another organization, you absolutely need that. And I'm going to encourage you to invest in your professional development. Pick 1 or 2 conferences that you want to be a part of in a given year and get out there and network with people. That's what I'm going to say. You're not alone. You're not alone. There are people out there that's willing to help.
And I also think that with conferences going either completely virtual or hybrid, there's so much more opportunity for people who didn't have access to those before to do it for a much more affordable price.
Yes.
We attend a lot of conferences at Keela, both as speakers and as just active participant. And I can say between marketing conferences and nonprofit conferences, I'm never not learning something when I'm there, even if I'm there doing tech support for a session that my CEO is doing. Right. It's amazing. Greg, this question's for you as we're talking about professional development. So you started Destination Excellence, a 6-month leadership development program for nonprofit executives. What need or missing piece of information did you notice that kind of kickstarted this program?
It was exactly what Sabrina just alluded to. It was that sense of isolation, right? I think it's important for nonprofit leaders to not confuse being surrounded by a lot of people with having support. Right? When I was a nonprofit executive director, I was always surrounded by people. I had staff, I had volunteers, I had donors, I had board members. I never had more people around me, but I was still lonely. I was still isolated. So when we thought about creating Destination Excellence, it was as an attempt to address that. It was about bringing together small groups of nonprofit leaders to not only learn together, so not only professional development, but also support one another. How have you done this? How have you addressed this particular challenge? It was building networks of relationships, not just transactional sharing of information. So that was something that was meaningful for me in my own development as a nonprofit executive. So when I had the opportunity to create that program, I wanted to incorporate not only sharing of knowledge, but also building of relationships and networks.
Awesome. And I think it's an excellent resource for a lot of people out there. So between staff retention, having hubs in old schools that Prince used to go to, between community Facebook groups, I think there's so many ways that we can connect and grow our skills. So all 3 of you have given us a lot of different ideas. So I appreciate that. We are coming close to the end of our panel. So if you have any extra questions that you want us to squeeze in before we close things off, please get them in now. But otherwise, Sean, I've got a question for you. So obviously at Keela, we love data and we love operations. We've actually built an entire solution around it. So with the work that you and your network do, what is the biggest piece of advice for small nonprofits looking to streamline their operations?
To streamline your operations, I would say do 3 things well instead of 20 things poorly. Too often we suffer from the shiny thing in the corner syndrome, and my staff knows I am sometimes executive Sean, where I'm in decision-making mode, and sometimes I'm entrepreneurial Sean. I'm like, oh, we could do all of these things. I have like all these bright ideas, but I know I have to resist that temptation and rein it down and keep us focused on doing 3 things well instead of 20 things poorly. We're a pretty small organization. Being small is strategic. Don't feel this constant pressure to scale. Everyone talks about scale and size. Evolution has always benefited smaller creatures over larger creatures. The cockroaches outlive the dinosaurs all the time. Being small is highly strategic. You get to specialize. So do a few small things really, really well, perfect them before you start going off in all these different directions. So in terms of streamlining, just be really, really excellent at one thing at a time.
That is awesome advice. And that is applicable for not just nonprofits, but literally any single industry that you're in. I definitely feel that do 3 things well instead of 20 things poorly. That is why the marketing team is so big, because everything that I can't do, we hire someone who can do it well, and together we kind of all make up a great cohesive unit, I think, where we all have different skills. So awesome. I don't know if any other questions have come into the chat. So I think I'm going to circle back to something that we touched on a little earlier in the panel, but I think it's something that's very prevalent, is imposter syndrome. And so I know a lot of nonprofit leaders, anyone in a nonprofit, any professional does suffer from imposter syndrome to some degree. So I'm wondering whether the 3 of you can give some advice on how to kind of overcome that and become more confident in yourself.
I will take that first, and I'll probably take it from a more spiritual or religious viewpoint. But I always say, God does not place you anywhere that you don't belong. And so if you are in the room, you belong there. And in belonging there, take ownership of that and represent yourself well while you're in the room. So that's been my viewpoint. If I am in the room, oftentimes I look around. Look, I live in a place that's 97% Hispanic. And oftentimes I look around and I am the only Black person in the room. And sometimes I'm the only woman in the room. But I always say to myself, I am here for a reason. I'm here for a purpose. And I am in the room, and God would not place me anywhere that I was not intended to be. So that's kind of my basis of walking in. You got the job, you have the skills, believe in yourself, and move forward.
I agree.
I think that is almost the perfect answer. So I don't know if Sean or Greg, you wanted to add anything on to that?
There's a saying that someone said to me once that was genius, and it's exactly what Sabrina just said, which is, you don't have to interview for the job you already have. If someone hired you as ED, that means you're qualified. Don't be looking around and comparing yourself. Oh, the person who runs the ACLU National, look what they can do. Or look at this person who runs the soup kitchen down the road, look what they can do. You are in this role because you deserve it and you are qualified, and you don't second guess yourself. Just, you don't have to interview for the job you already have. When you're thinking about like imposter syndrome or feeling like you don't have all the skills you need, none of us. Someone might look like they have it all together over there, but they might be a mess inside, right? So just like focus on yourself, not anyone else, and just be awesome, be your stellar self.
Sam, the only thing I would add is just understand your identity is more than your role. Right? You are more than just the executive director of organization ABC. Surround yourself. You're going to be surrounded all day, every day with people who are looking to you for answers, for information, for support, for guidance. Make sure you also have those people in your life who see you for just you outside of that role, whether it's your kids, whether it's your spouse, your significant other, your pet, your dog, someone who sees you as someone outside of just the role that you occupy Monday to Friday.
Absolutely. I was going to end it on a bit of parting advice. I feel like that was also a lovely bit of parting advice, but I'll pass it off to the 3 of you if you wanted to say anything else to our audience today before we sign off here. And we can start with Sabrina.
Well, I just want to encourage people, like, you are here because you obviously want to improve your leadership and you want to learn from others. And that is a great trait. Continue to have that trait, continue to improve upon your abilities, and surround yourself with people that you want to emulate. You know, this is all about learning as you go. Just continue to be curious, as Gregory started out saying. Continue to be curious and continue to, you know, invest in yourself. You have to invest in yourself. So I will end it with that.
Amazing. And either Greg or Sean, you can take it away.
Greg?
Sure. I would say, you know, where I started the conversation, which is stay curious, you know, stay curious, keep asking those hard questions. And the second is be your best advocate. You are the best advocate that you have for you. So whether we're talking about an employment contract or benefits or, you know, a professional development for yourself and your staff, you have the skills inside you to advocate for yourself and your team. Don't be afraid to do so.
And I would just say that one of the things that I have learned is a luxury, and I'm lucky in the current organization that I'm in right now that we're not constantly, like, we're not at a pace, we're not working at a pace that is crazy. We get to actually have a little bit more time. So one of the things I would encourage folks to do is to actually make time to do nothing and make time to plan. It is a luxury. It is a feature of leadership development. It is a feature of capacity that you have hours and blocks in your week where you are not taking meetings. Mondays, I do not take meetings. Monday is the day I use to process stuff and get through work. I make time for myself to do nothing in terms of like giving my time away to other people. But my staff also have hours every month that they take to read about equity and justice and racial equity. And we take hours to just plan. Be kind to yourself. Not everything has to be back-to-back meetings and constant work. It's okay to step aside. Sun's out, beautiful afternoon in March, go take a walk, right? Be kind to yourself. This work is taxing. So just like treat yourself to some time to plan and not be constantly freaked out.
That is excellent advice. And I believe with that, we are going to round out our panel and close things out.